Today we're taking a look at Hyundai's least expensive vehicle in America, the all-new 2018 Hyundai Accent. In addition to being completely redesigned for this model year, Hyundai has also decided to make the Accent a sedan only in the United States. So there's no more Accent hatchback. That's kind of an unusual decision because most of the competition is either available as a hatchback or actually some of them are available only as a hatchback. The family resemblance is instantly obvious. We have a grille that looks very much like the 2018 Hyundai Sonata with this slight kink to the otherwise angular grille, horizontal lines right there, fog lights below in the model that we're driving, and projector beam headlamps with an LED accent strip. I think overall the Accent is probably one of the more upscale looking models in this particular segment. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Although it is still obvious that this is a subcompact vehicle with a budget mission in mind because we don't find as much chrome and as much detail going on in this grille as we find, of course, in the Sonata, which is considerably larger and more expensive. The Accent, Elantra, and Sonata all look fairly similar from the side profile, but again, like the front, you can see that this is a little bit less expensive in terms of the amount of chrome and the overall styling detail going on the side of the vehicle. At 172.6 inches, this is about 8 inches shorter overall than a Hyundai Elantra and about 20 inches shorter than a Sonata. America's preference for sedan-shaped vehicles over hatchbacks is a little unusual in the world, and there's a reason for that. This sedan shape ends up being a little bit less practical overall than a vehicle that was the same length but a hatchback. We get a little bit less cargo area in the back, and in order to have this shape going on, you'll notice that they also have to cut rear seat headroom. And in most of the competition's hatchback models, we will find more headroom in the back. That's just simple geometry, because if you take the same basic shape and you scale it up and down, you have to make compromises somewhere, and you can only shorten the trunk so much. I think the overall design out back is quite elegant compared to other subcompact sedans. Our model has the partial LED tail lamp module, so we have LED brake lights and these parking lamps up top, but the turn signals and the backup lights are still incandescent bulbs. You'll see the turn signal there on that other side. Hyundai tucks the exhaust pipe right there under the rear bumper, and then we have a black section with a little bit of a curl to it to give this a little bit more visual interest. In the US, all Accents get the same engine. It's a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine. It produces 130 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque. You have the choice of two different transmissions, a 6-speed manual or a 6-speed automatic. Depending on which one you get, fuel economy will range between 31 and 32 miles per gallon. In case you're wondering, this is a traditional 6-speed automatic. This is not a continuously variable transmission that's trying to imitate a 6-speed. So if you're looking for something in this segment and you really want to avoid the CVTs that we find in some of the competition, this would be an excellent option. And of course, it still carries Hyundai's 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. Bearing in mind that our front seat comfort scores only apply within the same segment, so compared to other subcompact vehicles, I'm going to have to give these seats 9 out of 10 points. I actually found these seats quite comfortable, even though they aren't quite as adjustable as some of the competition. I had no problem sitting in these seats for an extended hour-long drive, although I do wish we had adjustable lumbar support. Now on the bright side, we do have some lumbar support here, it's just not adjustable. So you'll definitely find more of a concave back in some of the competition. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, and overall, I think the driving position is a little bit better than what we see in the Nissan Versa sedan. In addition to that, headroom is fairly generous. Sitting very upright in this seat, I have about 1.5 inches of headroom left. And as we see in other Hyundai models, you can move these seats quite far back. So if you're looking for an inexpensive vehicle that will still accommodate a taller driver or a taller front passenger, the Accent is actually a fairly good option. Moving to the rear, overall comfort falls behind the hatchback competitors just because of the overall shape of the vehicle that really limits headroom. You'll find a notably more comfortable backseat, especially for taller people, in the Fit, the Rio, and the Versa, although we do find more room back here than you find in the Fiesta hatchback. If I sit upright, or try to sit upright back here, I do have to crane my head to one side in order to get my head anywhere near the headrest in the back seat. If I move over to the middle of the vehicle, that's even more pronounced because this middle seat is higher off the ground. Of course, one of the other differences between this and the Elantra and the Sonata is obviously going to be the width of the rear bench seat. This is a lot narrower, so it's unlikely that you're really going to be putting 3 adults across the rear. If I move over to the right side, this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, suitable for a very tall person up front, and I can just barely put my knees behind the seat. They're digging into the seat back. However, the footwells are actually somewhat comfortable, so if it wasn't for the headroom, I could do this for a while. The rear seat backs feature a 60/40 folding design, although it's worth noting that the center seat belt does not come out of the seat back, it actually comes out of the parcel shelf. When it comes to cargo capacity, the Accent does fall behind some of the hatchback competitors, especially if you're looking at cargo capacity when the rear seats are folded forward and you're trying to use all of that room for larger items. However, the Accent does surprisingly well for a sedan. At 14 cubic feet, this is just 1/10 of a cubic foot smaller than a base Camry. And that Camry is about 2 feet longer than the Accent. In addition to that, we have a cargo area that is very well shaped. So this is a 22-inch roller bag, the largest size you can carry on a domestic flight, and you can actually line them up right here across the back of the trunk and still close that lid. That is quite impressive. This is why it's important to keep the dimensions of a trunk, not just the overall cubic foot capacity in mind, because this trunk is very deep and very square, making it an awful lot more practical than many mid-size sedans. Also something of a surprise, if we lift up the load floor, we find a temporary spare tire and enough room to put a full-size spare tire or additional cargo if you wanted to. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim. That's why we find a sunroof right there above the driver and front passengers' heads. The front row also gets height-adjustable shoulder belts and height-adjustable headrests. These are fabric seats, and there are actually 3 different fabrics going on. So if you take a close look right there at the side bolsters, that's actually a slightly different fabric than what we find in the center of the seat. It's a little bit difficult to film on camera, of course. And then we get a slightly different fabric for the sides of the seats themselves. Just as you'd expect with a small car, the front doors are fairly small as well. And that's why we find the small cutout right here in the B-pillar, because if you're a taller person or you have the seat moved further back, you'll actually end up using that sort of as part of the armrest. As we see in most subcompact vehicles, the front doors are made entirely of hard plastics, including that armrest right there. Although we do get a very generously sized storage compartment right there below the armrest next to the speaker grille. Just as we see with most of the competition, the dashboard is hard as well. Although I think this is a little bit more attractively styled than most of the competition. If we move down here, we find a bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to fit a large tablet computer inside. Smaller ones should definitely fit with a little bit more room. The styling of the dashboard is very similar to the rest of the Hyundai lineup, although again, things are a little bit simpler here in their budget vehicle. In this trim, the dashboard is dominated by this touchscreen infotainment system. The model that we're driving also features keyless go. We do have a few physical buttons down here, and this display supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That means that effectively this vehicle has navigation, although we don't actually find the factory navigation software in this particular model. If we hit the Maps button, it actually just takes you right over here to the app integration screen. Below the infotainment screen, we have the single zone automatic climate control system. Again, this is optional. And then below that, we have the heated seat controls, as well as the drive mode button. This allows you to choose between normal and sport. Things are a little bit more limited down here at the bottom of the food chain. And then we find 2 12-volt power ports, a USB input, auxiliary input, and a place to store your phone. Even though the Accent is one of the least expensive Hyundais, it actually gets their latest key design, which I think is attractive. And the storage cubby is definitely large enough to carry large smartphones. We have a fairly traditional console shifter behind that. Drive is all the way back towards the driver. Pull to the left for the manual mode, push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. Between the front seats, we find a traditional handbrake, 2 cup holders, and then a softly padded armrest. This is kind of a nice respite from the hard ones that we find on the doors. This opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment where we don't find any additional USB inputs or power ports. The instrument cluster is fairly simple, but again, you can see the family resemblance with the other Hyundai products. We have white numbers on black faces, tachometer on the left, speedometer there on the right, and then a monochromatic multifunction display between those 2 gauges. This is a pretty basic display. We don't find all the same options that we see in other Hyundai products, but this is still where we would adjust certain vehicle settings, for instance, the way the forward collision warning and mitigation system works. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design with sport grips up top. You'll find the infotainment controls over here on the left, mute, volume up, down, track forward, backward, as well as a mode button, phone buttons, voice command button. And then over on the right, we have the controls for the cruise control, as well as the buttons that control that multifunction display. So this changes the page, this toggles options up and down, and then we click OK to accept. 0 to 60 acceleration in the Accent happens in 8.6 seconds. We do get a decent amount of engine noise coming from that engine in the process, but this is one of the faster subcompact sedans in America. This is actually faster than all versions of the Versa and most versions of the Ford Fiesta, obviously excluding their Performance Fiesta in America. Now, according to most people, you will go a little bit faster in the manual transmission version of the Versa, but you really will have to work hard. Keep in mind, of course, we only have 130 horsepower under the hood, although the Accent is fairly light. That light curb weight helps the Accent stop in a relatively short 118 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. I was fairly impressed by that stopping distance. Some small cars in America, especially those that have high efficiency in mind, definitely take longer to stop than this. The relatively light curb weight and the excellently designed suspension help the Accent handle an awful lot better than you might think. This actually outhandles just about everybody in this segment except for the Ford Fiesta ST. But the Fiesta is not exactly the same thing because this Accent is not a performance-focused model. When it comes to overall handling feel, I think that the Yaris sedan actually beats this model. That's mainly because it's actually a Mazda 2 under the skin with a Toyota logo on the front. That model has received a few tweaks for its latest model year, but the basics of the vehicle are essentially the same, so it's not really going to be any faster than this, it's not going to handle any better than this either, but it is going to feel a little bit more engaging in terms of steering feel out on the road. When it comes to the overall ride quality, I'm going to give the Accent an A-. Keep in mind, of course, that the Accent is still a small vehicle, and smaller vehicles will tend to have more of a bobble-headed feel to them out on rougher roads, especially washboard pavement like out on the highway. It's also worth noting that when you step up from the Accent to certain compact sedans in America, you will get a more elegant rear suspension design. Now, not every compact sedan in America has an independent rear suspension, but even those that don't seem to be a little bit more sorted out on the road than the Accent. It's only noticeable when you really start pushing this vehicle harder in corners, and of course out on rougher gravel roads like this, that the rear suspension can get just a little bit upset. That's something that we see in just about every subcompact car in America. That is, of course, except for Toyota's Yaris sedan, but as I said before, that's actually a Mazda in Toyota clothing. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we recorded 72.5 decibels in this cabin. That makes this one of the quieter subcompact vehicles you can get. Speaking in general terms, sedans tend to be a little bit quieter than their hatchback variants because, of course, the trunk is actually closed off from the passenger area and there's that seat in the way. That means that road noise and wind noise that enter the vehicle back there near that cargo area can't actually get into the vehicle, but they can in the average hatchback because of its overall design. Now, obviously, we find less sound deadening in this than you find in your average compact sedan, so there's definitely more engine noise and a little bit more tire noise, especially up front coming into the cabin, than we find in the Hyundai Elantra. Over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging 31 miles per gallon in this vehicle, which is a little bit below what the EPA says we should get. Fuel economy is something that Hyundai and their sister brand Kia have struggled with in the United States. We don't know if that will change in the future because there are rumors that the Accent might be getting a continuously variable transmission soon. Of course, those are unsubstantiated, so stay tuned to see if that actually happens, perhaps in the 2019 or 2020 model year. The traditional 6-speed automatic transmission instead of a continuously variable transmission is one of the big reasons that average fuel economy in this vehicle will be 2 to 6 miles per gallon lower than some of the options from Nissan and from Honda. Of course, if you're not a fan of continuously variable transmissions and you are willing to give up a little bit in terms of fuel economy, this would be an excellent option because we don't find an old 4-speed or 5-speed automatic under the hood like we used to find in many subcompacts in America. This actually has one of Hyundai's latest 6-speed automatics and a brand new engine as well. The 2018 Accent starts at $14,995. That will get you the SE trim with the manual transmission. If you want the automatic transmission, it's an extra $1,000. Now, when we're talking about vehicles down here at this end of the pricing scale, it's important to remember that we're talking about MSRPs, and a lot of manufacturers have consistent discounts down here with their subcompact cars. So you do want to keep in mind that the effective price at the dealer may be notably less than this. For instance, at the time that we're filming this, Hyundai is offering about $1,500 off every trim. However, because discounts vary from season to season, in these videos, we're always talking about MSRP because it's the only thing that we can reliably comment on for a complete calendar year. The base Accent is pretty basic, but we do have a 5-inch infotainment system and Bluetooth phone connection. But if you want things like alloy wheels, Apple CarPlay, or Android Auto integration, a tilt telescopic steering column, auto headlamps, or rear disc brakes, or even an exterior temperature display, you have to move on up to the SEL trim. The model we were driving this week was the nearly $19,000 limited trim. That's where the Accent tops out, and that gets you things like the collision warning system with autonomous braking, heated front seats, fog lights, LED tail lights, etc. Our first competitor is the Nissan Versa. The Versa is available as either a sedan or hatchback, but we're talking about the sedan here because the Accent is available only as a sedan at this time. The Versa is very, very inexpensive. One might even call it crazy cheap. It starts at $12,110 at the moment. If you want the CVT, however, that bumps the price up notably to $14,250, and that's where you're going to get the 34 miles per gallon that you frequently see advertised for the Versa. If Fuel economy is fairly good in the Versa all the way around, and it's a nice, practical, inexpensive vehicle. However, it doesn't feel as premium as the Accent. It is getting fairly old these days, and the interior really is starting to show that age. The way that the plastics have been molded, the way things fit and feel inside the cabin, they just don't feel as premium as what we see in the Hyundai. The Nissan Versa also doesn't have a warranty as long as we find in the Hyundai either. I think it's pretty easy to bottom line these two cars. If you want the better car, that would be the Hyundai Accent. But if you want the less expensive car, that would be the Nissan Versa. Personally, I think the higher MSRP on the Hyundai Accent is warranted, and I think it is the better vehicle overall. Next up, we have the Honda Fit, which is not available as a sedan. I think the Fit comes across as one of the more grown-up entries in this segment. It definitely has a nicer interior than the average. It's a bit more expensive than the average as well, however. Fuel economy is quite good in the Fit. It gets 36 miles per gallon with the CVT versus 32 in the Hyundai Accent. We also have a serious dedication to cargo practicality in the Fit. That's long been one of its selling points that continues with this new model. Honda has been pretty aggressive at pushing their latest active safety technologies into even lower end trims. Although it's not standard on the Fit, it is optional and it's available in lower end trims. And of course, on the Accent, we only get that autonomous braking system and collision warning system in the higher end trims. It's also worth noting that the Honda Sensing package that's available on the Fit for $1,000 contains more active safety goodies than we see even in that top-end limited Accent. On the downside, of course, you will have to pay for it because the Honda Fit will be more expensive than the Hyundai. It also won't have a warranty that's as long. Next up, we have the Accent's very close cousin, the Kia Rio, which starts at $13,900. That's for the very basic model. It sounds like the Rio is going to be a lot less expensive than the Accent on the surface of things, but keep in mind that basic model is pretty basic. We don't have power windows, we don't have Bluetooth, etc., and those are all things that we do find in the Hyundai Accent. Kia tells us that that base Rio model was really driven by a select number of dealers that wanted an absolute stripped down car, and that's why they're selling that base model. Because once you step from that base model onto the other trims, you'll find that it will be just about the same price, or actually a little bit more expensive than the Hyundai Accent. If you're looking for certain key features like Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, they will be more expensive in the Rio because we have to step up to the EX trim, that very top-end trim level, whereas we do find those features in the Accent SEL, which is the mid-level trim. Fuel economy is essentially the same, quite logically, because they use the same engine, transmission, etc. On the practicality side, both models are also very equal, except that Kia offers a hatchback version of the Rio, which I do find more practical than the sedan version. In addition to that, if you're looking for a small compact vehicle with a more premium interior, in the hatchback version of the Rio, you can get leather seats, and I think that really does dress up the interior to a level that we don't see in the Accent. However, aside from that one particular model, if you're just looking at the sedan version of the Rio versus the sedan version of the Accent, I think the Accent is a slightly better buy. I think that Hyundai has done a slightly better job at packaging features, especially in that middle trim, and the Accent I think is more attractive than the Rio. The Rio just looks a little bit too cartoonish, the way that they've had to shrink everything down yet still have that same style. Now, the Accent is also a little bit cartoonish in a way compared to the Hyundai Sonata, but I think that overall style just worked a little bit better when they shrank it down. Next up, we have the Yaris IA, which is really actually a Mazda 2 sedan wearing Toyota clothing. This was, of course, part of the Scion lineup before, but when Scion died, Toyota just sort of jammed it in the rest of their lineup. The Yaris's origin as a Scion vehicle actually makes it a pretty good deal because it's available really only two ways. We have the manual transmission version, and then we have the automatic transmission version. If you want the manual transmission, that will cost you $15,950, the automatic $17,050. That means, of course, that there is no direct comparison to the base version of the Accent, but if you're looking at mid-level or upper-end trims, I think the Yaris actually compares incredibly well, because it comes with a decent amount of standard technology, like the 7-inch LCD infotainment system, push-button start, Bluetooth integration, 34 to 35 miles per gallon, which is actually among the best in this segment, and their autonomous braking system. And the Yaris IA is actually fun to drive. That's because of its Mazda DNA. It definitely drives very differently from the rest of the Yaris lineup. Now, admittedly, when it comes to style, I think the Accent is a better looking car. The Yaris IA kind of looks like a hungry guppy swallowed a Mazda, but I think that's a worthwhile trade-off for the excellent value and the excellent handling dynamics. And that's why my top pick in this segment is the Toyota Yaris IA. It's just a great all-around value. Other than that, the Accent I think is number 2. The Versa is crazy cheap, but you get what you pay for. The Rio is more premium in the top-end hatch, but I think the Accent is a slightly better value, and I like the styling of the Accent overall a little bit better as well. Honda's Fit is definitely practical, delivers excellent fuel economy, and it feels a little bit more premium, but you're going to pay for that extra premium. And when it comes to value, I think the Yaris IA and the Accent beat it. Be sure and let me know what your pick in this segment would be down there in the comment section below. Hit that subscribe button down there if you haven't already done so. You can find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos if you want to see what we're driving this week. You can also click up there at the top of your screen and be taken on over to patreon.com where you can support this channel. I'll see you next week.